Welcome to Hot Topics Live, everyone. Today we're going to be talking all about tips and tricks for perfect cupcakes. So I know that over in the Facebook community, I asked a question about how many of you were selling cupcakes on your menu. And boy, did you guys turn out with some beautiful photos of cupcakes that you've made. So because you all are just very well versed in cupcakes already, I am going to be chatting a little bit about how to create a perfect cupcake, but also I've gone in and added some bonus talking points today to give you some tips for selling more cupcakes. So in today's Hot Topics Live, I'm going to be sharing with you tips and tricks for creating great cupcakes and for selling more cupcakes. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, you're in the right place. Stick around. This is going to be a jam-packed episode. All right, so if you have been around this group for a while, then you've probably heard me talk about being a competitor on the Food Network show Cupcake Wars. And if you haven't, then you can totally Google it. I can't guarantee that you're going to love the results, but I was on the very first episode, very first season of Cupcake Wars, and my challenge was seaweed and sea salt. And you'll have to check it out to find out how it turns out. Why was I asked to be on Cupcake Wars? Well, from 2007 till 2017, I owned and operated a chain of 3 cupcake stores. And at the height of the cupcake craze, I was selling almost 1,000 cupcakes daily, bringing in over $500,000 in sales annually. So when it comes to cupcakes, I feel pretty well versed in all things cupcakes. Over the course of 10 years and 3 different locations, I sold every type of flavor combination and style imaginable. I lived and breathed all things cupcakes. And I have to admit, if I'm being honest, that lifestyle was no walk in the park. I can honestly say that I got a little burnt out on cupcakes. But I still bake cupcakes, and from time to time, I am asked by friends and family to make cupcakes, and I still do love cupcakes. So I guess you can say that we've kissed and made up. So today, I'm going to share some of my tips and strategies when it comes to making and selling these devilish little cuties. So if you're ready, let's jump right in. I promised you lots of tips today, and I hope to deliver. So let's start out with those of you who are still working on perfecting, there's the word I'm looking for. Those of you who are still working on perfecting your cupcakes. And I want to share with you, I actually went back into my operations manual for my cupcake bakery and pulled out a section that I used to train the bakers with. And so I wrote it so well back then. I'm like, why reinvent the wheel? Let's just go see what I had to say 10 years ago about how to bake the perfect cupcake. So I always brought new bakers in and kind of broke it down into these categories. So the first category for how to actually produce fantastic cupcakes is bake it right. And the perfect cupcake starts with obviously a great recipe. And I am a firm believer that a cake recipe is not always the same thing as a great cake recipe is not always the same thing as a great cupcake recipe. Definitely chocolate cake, red velvet cake, carrot cake, what I would call a sturdier cake, works pretty well for both, but a white cake does not work very well for a cake as well as it does for a cupcake. So you might need to do a little bit of experimenting with your recipe until you land on a recipe that makes a really good vanilla or white or yellow cupcake. And FYI, I'm going to be linking 3 of my tried and true recipes at the end of this Hot Topics Live. I'll come out of the video and I'll comment them in the chat so that you can all jump over to the blog and grab those recipes. Those recipes have been made thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and they're just perfected to the point where my customers became loyal fans over those flavors. So you definitely want to start with a great recipe that bakes into a really good cupcake. Now, speaking of a really good cupcake, I defined for my bakers what my ideal naked cupcake would look like. And I would challenge you to do the same. What does your unfrosted cupcake look like? So this is going to be different for everybody because some people like a very flat surface to work on. Some people like kind of a rounded top, and I don't particularly, but some people do like a top that kind of overflows onto the pan a little bit. So it has to be your style of, this is my ideal naked cupcake. That's what we call them in the shop, naked cupcakes. And then once you define that, then that is what you need to reproduce every time. So for me, my ideal naked cupcake comes up to the top of the pan, but doesn't spread out over it. It's slightly domed, but not peaked in the center. And it has to come up over the paper liner. And we'll chat a little bit about why that needs to happen here in a bit. But so that's what my perfect cupcake looks like. So once you have this goal that you're going for, that's what you need to be able to reproduce all the time. Now, how do you get the consistency of reproducing that all the time? For several different characteristics, they need consistency. One is your scoop size. So how full does each type of batter like to be filled in your cupcake pan? So your cupcake pan, maybe you have like a mini and a standard, or maybe even do a jumbo. How much, let's say we're using chocolate batter, how much chocolate batter do you need to put into that pan to get your perfect naked cupcake? For the batters that I've used, there's a different amount for each. So my white batter is a little bit fuller. My chocolate batter, a little bit less full. My red velvet batter, about the same as my chocolate. So you need to know your batters well enough to know how much of each flavor goes in each size. So the perfect fill amount. So for myself and my bakers, what we did was we have color-coded scoops, and chocolate always got the yellow handle, and the white batter always got the squeezy handle, metallic, like no colored handle, and then the red velvet got the same as the chocolate. So that's just my methodology. Is it scientific? Yeah, sort of. I mean, they always end up weighing about 1.75 ounces. But the concept here is to get that consistency and then know exactly how you got it. The next area of control that you want when you're looking for the perfect cupcake is your oven temperature. And I see so many conversations inside Facebook groups about what's the temperature that you should use. And really, it's not the dial on your oven, it's the actual temperature inside. So one of those little hanging oven thermometers to calibrate what your perfect cupcake bakes at is what I recommend. And that's what I go by when I'm baking cupcakes. So for my batters, I bake my chocolate at a very low temperature, at like 300 degrees, sometimes even 275, which some of you are going to think is crazy, but that's how I got my perfect cupcake. And that's what we looked for on the inside of the oven temperature. So I invite you to do the same. Get one of those little hardware store, cheapo, internal oven thermometers and check what it is that is creating the perfect cupcake for you. Jot that down and then use that and not the oven dial. All right, and then my final tip for baking it right is not to overcrowd your oven. So if you're doing a test with a dozen cupcakes and it's turning out perfect, just be aware that when you have a big order and you want to fill your oven up with maybe 4 pans instead of 1, that they're not going to bake the same, because they need that airflow and that perfect amount of heat to create the perfect naked cupcake. So as you're scaling up or maybe taking larger orders, just know that not to overcrowd your oven. So I would sort of stagger them, offset them, 1 pan here, 1 pan here, 1 pan here, so that there was lots of airflow inside the oven. Now, when you go to decorate your flavors or your cupcakes, there's several ways that you can add some personality. And you can add flavor to the batter, you can add flavor to the buttercream, or it can be in the form of fillings and customizing the tops. So I like to do all three. For many people, cupcakes are flavor first. And I noticed over in the Facebook group, a lot of you sounded like you had what I call flavor first types of cupcakes. And that is basically like they taste like the name. So the maple bacon bourbon, somebody said, or the strawberries and cream, or the banana peanut butter. People are interested in those flavors because they expect them to taste the way they sound. So we have the flavor first people. And then we have my fancy terminology is the fancy first people. And there's no right or wrong. There's actually a market for both types of cupcakes, but the fancy first cupcakes are the ones where your customer is just much more interested in the look, the design, the colors, and the presentation. So ideally, you can win over both types of customers with your cupcake creations. But when it comes to adding that personality to your cupcake, just sort of beware of what your market is. Are you a highly customized custom cake bakery, and your customers tend to want cupcakes to match an event? That's probably that fancy first type of cupcake. But for the majority of what I saw in this group in the comments on Sunday, it looks like many of you are flavor first. So we'll chat about that one really quickly here. And flavoring your batter is the first way to kind of layer on the flavor. So I like to start with either the vanilla cake or the chocolate cake, and then say, what can I do to this cake to make it not just be a vanilla cake with banana frosting, but what can we do to take the cake up a notch? So I like to use color, and I like to use flavor in the batter. And you can do anything from oils to purees to little bits and pieces of chocolate chips, butterscotch chips, nuts, things like that. So don't forget about the batter when you're layering on the flavor. Lots of ways to pump up the flavor and not just put a flavored frosting on a basic cupcake. There are times when that's really good. If you've got an amazing chocolate cake and that is what you're going for, is just that hardcore chocolate lover's cake, then nothing beats plain old good chocolate. But when that chocolate cake has espresso powder and mini chocolate chips and cocoa nibs in it and some mocha buttercream on top, then you've really ramped it up a little bit. The next way that you can infuse more flavor is, of course, in the buttercream frosting. And this is where you can go with, again, almost the same thing that you're putting in the batter. Purees, seasonings, spices, nut butters. I mean, you name it, you can swirl it in there. I've put all kinds of stuff in batter just to kind of get as much flavor as possible, including like even reducing alcohol in there. I've definitely had many requests for like a groom's favorite beer flavored cupcake, and I literally would just simmer these beers down to make them a thick syrup and then swirl it into buttercream. So as long as you can maintain the integrity of the buttercream, the sky's the limit with swirling in flavor. My favorite by far is the concentrated oils and extracts, and over on my blog, I give a rundown of some of my favorites, so I'll link those in the comments as well. But let's talk a bit about those customizing with the fillings and the decorations for those who sell what I call the fancy first cupcakes. So that is in itself an art, and while my focus was much more towards the flavor first, I spent some time, quite a bit of time, on that fancy type of cupcake. And for that, I sometimes would switch up my frosting. So a frosting that makes a really good flavor first cupcake is not always the frosting that you want on something that needs to have some structure, needs to crust over, needs to be able to pipe rosebuds or flower leaves or things like that. So think about having a second type of frosting when you need to do some highly decorated cupcakes. And that is what we would in my bakery call wedding buttercream. And wedding buttercream really needs to hold up to some heat and some technique more than my signature buttercream, which is just really loaded with butter and, melts above 75 degrees. So a crusting over buttercream is great for that kind of custom work. Now, I promised, because so many of you already looked like you are doing a lot of cupcake baking and selling already, that I wanted to bring more to today's training by sharing some tips for increasing your cupcake sales. So for the cake decorators in the group, if you make and sell custom cakes, this is for you. So listen up, cake decorators. Cupcakes are a great way to gain new clients because people always have an occasion for cake. And cupcakes are just that great little entryway to learn a little bit more about you and your business. So for those of you in the group who are custom cake decorators, just know that selling one-off cupcakes is a great model for bringing people in as loyal customers. So a typical customer journey for my clients in the cupcake store days would be that somebody would come in as a regular, just picking up a treat, to have on a Friday night at home while they're watching movies, whatever. You don't need a reason to eat a cupcake, but they'd come in and get a few and then fall in love with a particular flavor. And then months and days down the line, or months and maybe years down the line, they would have this occasion for a cake, either a birthday, and oftentimes it was a wedding, where they would say, well, who are we going to get to do our wedding cake? I wonder if the lady that does those cupcakes could make a wedding cake taste as good as those cupcakes. And so that was always my lead in to the much bigger sales. So if you do custom cakes, keep in mind that the person that you're selling that cupcake to could, in fact, be a very regular customer of yours down the line. So one of my favorite customers who ordered a wedding cake from me in the very early days, I didn't realize that she had come back. So she was a customer as a cupcake, one-off, a cupcake on a treat day type of thing, asked me to do her wedding. I did the wedding, and then I didn't recognize her. I wasn't always at the front of my store. I didn't recognize her as she came in. I just noticed that this was a mom and said, can you do my baby's first birthday? And as I'm taking her order, I was like, you look awfully familiar. And she's like, yeah, you did my wedding 7 years ago. And now, you've done my baby shower. And now this is my baby's first birthday. And I was just like, that just makes me so happy. I love that longevity, that relationship that people make with cakes and having a favorite baker. So just know that your cupcake could be the entry point for somebody to have you be their favorite cake baker. So if you're not a cake baker, but you still have cupcakes on your menu and you want to try to sell more of them, cupcakes are perfect for weddings just as is, without offering the wedding cake itself. Consider writing your social media posts about cupcakes with a bride or a wedding in mind. So the next time you do a really pretty cupcake, you can totally make a Facebook post that says, these are perfect for weddings. And if you want to learn more about doing cupcake weddings, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to put that on the calendar for an upcoming training. Cupcake weddings are, I thought they were a trend 10 years ago, but they're still here and people still do lots of cupcake weddings. And so it's a great opportunity for you to get large orders if you just do cupcakes. And then let's just talk about flavor first cupcake bakers. So you've got cupcakes on your menu and you just want to keep selling lots of cupcakes. Maybe a wedding is a little bit outside of your confidence level right now or your ability level. What is a tip for you as a cupcake baker or someone who has cupcakes on their menu? Think about creating a cupcake menu that has your best sellers available all the time. So 2 to 6 of the flavors that your customers always ask for are things that you always have available. And then because you all have such creative ideas, I've seen the pictures that you've shared and some of those flavors sound amazing. Think about rotating those flavors in and out of your menu so that you have one special that you can talk about and then always offering your customer favorites core menu. And then that seasonal flavor is something you can bring back from time to time and really re-engage your customers. All right, I promised that after this this live is done, I'm going to drop the links for my red velvet cake, which I love this recipe because it bakes perfectly every time. It is so perfect. And I know that you'll love it too. I had a customer from Savannah, Georgia come in to Topeka, Kansas, where my store was, and literally pull me aside and say to me, like, that red velvet cake was just as good as what my grandma made. It's a Southern style red velvet and it was perfect. And she said, except one thing, it needs to have pecans on top. And I didn't want to just put plain pecans on top. So I did a candied pecan, and I could not wait for her to come back in and try it. And she came back in and really grabbed me by the shoulders and she's like, that is totally it. So you can find that red velvet recipe with the candied pecan topping in the link that I'll drop. And then I'm also going to share my chocolate cake recipe. And I love this recipe, especially just for cupcakes. It's a very liquidy chocolate cake batter. You're going to think that it's too runny, but it bakes up so delicious, especially if you use a super high quality cocoa powder in it. So the better the cocoa powder, the better the chocolate cake tastes. And I'm not talking the Hershey's stuff. Like, go out of your way and find that high butterfat content cocoa powder for this recipe. And then I'm also going to drop a link to my favorite white cake recipe. And it's a little bit more complicated. It's got some steps to it, but it is the softest, fluffiest, moistest white cake. And because white cake is by far the biggest complaint that my customers ever had, it's like it wasn't soft enough. It wasn't fluffy enough. It tastes like a biscuit. It tastes like cornbread. I mean, I've heard it all. I've tried a million white cake recipes. This is the one that I landed on after years and years and years of trial and error. So to save you guys some time with that experimenting, if you've ever had complaints about the moisture in your white cake, you definitely want to check out that recipe as well. So this has been a fun topic. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments what questions you have. And of course, I went a little over on time today, but we're talking cupcakes. I mean, I have a lot to say. So thank you all for joining. Thanks for watching. Thanks over in the live. And for those watching on replay, I'm really excited to have a continued conversation in the Facebook group all about cupcakes. All right, guys. Thanks for watching.